Hi, my name is Kyvan Savage and today I'm going to be doing A-level biology revision on sensory receptors. So in this we're going to kind of outline the roles of sensory receptors in mammals in converting different forms of energy into nerve impulses. And we're also going to look at the structure and functions of motor neurons with the aid of diagrams. So that sounds great. One sec. Okay, and yeah, they do feature in, and don't worry, that was someone I was talking to in the text. Okay, so if we start off with sensory receptors. So what are sensory receptors? They're specialised cells and they detect changes in our surroundings. Easily, sensory, detect changes. They are energy transducers and that convert one form of energy to another. Each type of transducer is adapted to detect changes in a particular form of energy, such as changes in light levels, changes in noise, change of pressure in the skin, and each change in energy levels is called a stimulus. So each change of energy in the environment is a stimulus. Whatever the stimulus is, sensory receptors, whatever stimulus is, like pressure on my skin or I'm touching the light, ow, really hot, the sensory receptors convert the energy into a form of electrical energy called a nerve impulse. So if we look at different receptors and what energy changes are detected by this. So in the rods and cones in your eyes, these are light sensitive cells and they detect light intensity and changes in range in wavelengths. If we look at the taste buds of your tongue, they look for the energy change of the presence of soluble chemicals in your tongue. Pressure receptors in the skin. What's obviously the energy change detected is the pressure on the skin. Sound receptors in the ear, the cochlea, the vibrations in the air, noise basically. Yeah, so that's pretty easy. I think that's kind of like GCSE stuff. But how are nerve impulses generated? Well, in AS biology, we looked at the all cell surface membranes. What do they have? They all have proteins. And some proteins are channels, which allow the movement of ions, which are the charged particles across the membrane. So you should remember that. If the channel is permanently open, the cells can diffuse across the membrane and will do so until the concentrations of that particular ion are equal on both sides of the membrane. So if you've got a permanently open channel, then ions will diffuse through it across the membrane and will do so until the concentrations are equal on both sides of the membrane. Yeah. Neurons. What are neurons? Nerve cells. Neurons, nerve cells, have a more specialised channel of proteins that are specific to either sodium, Na, or potassium, K ions. They also possess a gate that can open or close the channels. So when open, the permeability of the membrane to that particular ion is increased, obviously, as they can come through. And when it's closed, the permeability of that particular ion of the membrane is decreased drastically. And these channels are usually kept closed. And nerve cell membranes also contain carrier proteins. Do you remember what they do? They actively transport things. And in the case of neurons and nerve cells, they actively transport sodium, Na, ions out of the cell and potassium ions, K plus, into the cell. And these are really easy, called sodium or potassium pumps, sodium-potassium pumps. More sodium ions are actively transported out of the cell than potassium ions are transported into the cell. And the inside of the cell is a bit more negatively charged with respect to the outside. And the cell membrane is said to be polarized. Now, if you want a strange way of remembering that, if you can ever remember which is more negatively charged, think of someone that's really sad. Like on the inside, they'll be feeling a bit sad, a bit down, a bit negative, but they might be putting on a really brave face to the outside world. So inside, they're a bit more negative than they are outside. Okay. That's just a strange way to remember it. So the cell membrane is said to be polarized because of the difference in charge on the opposite sides. But how is a nerve impulse actually created? Like I said before, how are they actually generated? Well, a nerve impulse is created by altering the permeability of the nerve cell membrane to sodium ions. As the sodium ion channels open, the membrane permeability is increased, and sodium ions can move across the membrane down their concentration gradient into the cell. I remember things always move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So the sodium ions move down a concentration gradient across the membrane into the cell. And the movement of the ions across the membrane creates a change in the potential difference charge across the membrane. The inside of the cell becomes less negative compared to the outside than usual. And so that's like the opposite we remembered. And that's called depolarization. So remember, when it was polarized, you feel sad on the outside, sad on the inside, happy on the outside. Polarized, sad, happy. Depolarized, happy, sad. And you could think of that as, I don't know if you've done it really well on a test, but your friend hasn't. You're really happy on the inside, but you want to show that on the outside. So depolarized, happy, unhappy. Yep. That's just an easy way to remember it. So if we want some key definitions, a polarized membrane is one that has a potential difference across it. This is the resting potential. Just remember that word now, resting potential. We'll come on to that in a different video. Another key definition, depolarization. We've just done it, can you remember? Well, anyway, it's the loss of polarization across the membrane. Easy. Depolarization, loss of polarization. It refers to the period when sodium ions entering the cell, making the inside less negative with respect to the outside. See. So then we come to generator potentials. Okay? And generator potentials, basically, receptor cells respond to changes in the environment. The gated sodium ion channels open, allowing sodium ions to diffuse across the membrane into the cell. So remember that? Receptor cell respond to changes to stimuluses in the environment. Then the gated sodium ion channels open. What do these allow to the cell? Sodium, which allows sodium ions to diffuse across the membrane into the cell. Now, a small change in the potential caused by one or two sodium ions opening, sodium ion channels opening, is called a generator potential. So when one or two sodium ion channels open, that creates a small change in potential, and we call that the generator potential. Now, the larger the stimulus, like what's the stimulus? Like a change in the energy levels in the environment, like so pressure stimulus, yeah. Change in the stimulus, the larger the stimulus, the more gated channels would open. If enough sodium ions enter the cell, the potential difference changes significantly and will initiate an impulse or an action potential. Okay, so what is an action potential? Well, an action potential is achieved when the membrane is depolarized. It's an all-nothing response. So in the events leading up to an action potential, the membrane depolarizes and reaches a threshold level, and then lots of sodium ions enter the axon and an action potential is reached. I know that all sounds like a blurb. If you've gone over that, and if you've gone over this and you're just watching this through revision, you'll understand that. Basically, an action potential is an impulse. So you'll probably know what an impulse is. We'll go through the body. Woo! Action potential, that's what it is. Okay, so I also said we're going over motor neurons. Well, once a stimulus has been detected and its energy has been converted to a depolarization of the receptor cell membrane, the impulse, the action potential, must be transmitted to other parts of the body. The impulse is transmitted along neurons as an action potential. Great. But there are loads of different types of neurons, and you should probably remember this. I remember this from GCSE biology. Can you remember how many there are? There are 3. We've already gone over one. Do you remember what the one was we've gone over before? It was with S from the environment. Yeah, it's a sensory neuron. And the sensory neurons carry the action potential from a sensory receptor to the central nervous system, the CNS. And the CNS is the brain and the spinal cord. CNS, central nervous system. Sensory neurons carrying the action potential from a sensory receptor to the central nervous system. Brain, spinal cord. Can you remember what else there is? I already said it. I've mentioned it, I haven't explained it. Can you remember what the other neuron is? It is a motor neuron. And these carry an action potential from the central nervous system to an effector, like a muscle or gland. So a motor neuron takes it from the spinal cord to effector, like the muscles in my hands, which make me pick something up. So, oh look, my phone has just gone off. So in the motor neuron, I get an action potential from the central nervous system to the effector, muscles in my hand, to tell me to pick up my phone and check my message. Okay, and the last one is a relay neuron. That's basically the ones that connect sensory and motor neurons. So it's easy. Relay, think of a relay race, passing the impulse from one to another. Now I think, if I've got my book here, I've got some pictures of different neurons that will kind of help you. So can you remember what they are? We have a sensory neuron, a motor neuron, and a relay neuron. There they are. Okay, great. The first one I'm going to show you is a sensory neuron. Okay, ignore the thing at the top, ignore this. It's just that one in the middle. Okay, can you see it? It looks like an alien with big arms coming out. It's got a little head in the middle and two going out on either side. This is a motor neuron. It's got a big bit at the end, like an octopus with all its legs coming out. A long line to a little clawy thing at the end. And finally, this is a relay neuron. It just looks like a mad thing that is a bit mad. It's got loads of arms, loads of legs, running around. Yeah. So basically, the function of a neuron is to transmit the action potential from one part of the body to another. And most neurons have a really similar basic structure that enables them to carry out the function. And these are specialised cells with following features. Quote from the book directly there. I'm just going to say the following features because they've written it really well. Okay. So, many of these specialised cells and neurons are really long, so they can transmit the action potential over a really long distance. Like there are ones going from the central nervous system to your fingers. So think how long that is. Look, that's my arm. Look, that's how long they are. The cell surface, the plasma membrane, has many gated ion channels that control the entry or exit of sodium, potassium or calcium ions. Great. Gated ion channels. Just remember that. That's what they have. Membrane has channels. They also have sodium potassium ion pumps, which use ATP to actively transport sodium ions out of the cell and potassium ions into the cell. Remember we mentioned that before when we were talking about generating nerve impulses? Yeah, that's basically it. These neurons maintain a potential difference across their cell surface, their plasma membrane. Most are surrounded by a myelin sheath. This is a series of Schwann cells. I'll go over this more in another video. Basically, we need to know that these neurons are surrounded by a fatty sheath called the myelin sheath. And these insulate the neuron from electrical activity in nearby cells. And between the Schwann cells, which make up the myelin sheath, there's something called a node of Ranvier. Yeah. And don't worry, I'll go over this much more in detail in another video. They have cell bodies that contain the nucleus, mitochondrion and ribosomes. Easy. And motor neurons specifically have their cell body in the central nervous system and have a long axon that carries the action potential to the effector. Okay. So what is an axon? Basically, it's going to be quite hard to explain this one because I'm not going into it in depth. But if we look at this motor neuron, there are two parts of it. Actually, if we look at sensory neuron, that would be easier. So the impulse is going this way, and you've got a cell body in the middle. Anything along the neuron, whatever's going towards this bit here is a dendron, and whichever part is going away from it is an axon. I know they're on the same line, but you just trust me on this. I'm going to be going over it in much more detail in another video. Basically, axon part that goes away, dendron part that goes towards. If you don't get it, no worries, I'm not explaining it very well. Anyway, sensory neurons, like I just showed you, have a really long dendron carrying the action potential from a sensory receptor to the cell body, which is sitting just outside the CNS. Then they have a short axon carrying the action potential away into the central nervous system. And both sensory and motor neurons have numerous dendrites, which basically is small dendrons connected to other neurons. Now, I know the last part of that is going to be really tricky if you don't quite understand it, but yes, good luck. I'll go over that in a better video, so good luck with your A-level biology.